approves a proposal of the Education Department to hold limited face-to-face classes, particularly in low-risk areas. News 5's Maricel Halili is joining us live from Mandaluyong to give us the lowdown. Mase, how does the DepEd plan to roll out or implement these limited face-to-face classes? This is, of course, different from their previous stance.
Yes, Sean. Actually, the original plan of the Department of Education is to implement face-to-face classes in low-risk areas. But recall that President Duterte is not in favor of that before because of the increasing number of COVID-19 cases. So if you remember, a few months ago, the President decided not to have a face-to-face class come August 24 in time for the opening of classes. But just a month before the scheduled of the opening of classes, Department of Education Secretary Leonor Briones formally presented her proposal before the members of the IATF and President Duterte. And it was shown earlier in a pre-recorded message of the President together with the Cabinet Secretaries, the proposal of Education Secretary Briones. And according to her, she thinks that it's about time to have a face-to-face class in areas which is considered a low risk, like Siargao, Dinagat Islands. These are the areas that have actually zero cases of COVID-19. But Secretary Briones stated that it's important to set conditions before implementing face-to-face classes. Number one, like what I said earlier, it should be considered as a low-risk area. Number two, the school must follow a minimum health standard. But even if the area is considered as low risk, it's not automatic that the schools can conduct face-to-face classes. It's important that members of the IATF, particularly Secretary Briones and Secretary Galvez, will have a physical inspection first of the school before implementing the face-to-face class.
All right, so how will that happen, Mase? Will there be a list of schools that are proposed na, kaya namin mag face-to-face classes and then i-check siya ng IATF with Sec Galvez?
First consideration is the school must be part of the low-risk areas. And then there will be an inspection by the members of the IATF or probably representatives of DepEd or the National Task Force, and then they will decide whether the school can be accredited to conduct face-to-face classes. But of course, they won't conduct a 5-day per week classes. It will also be limited, let's say, just a day per week. That's what Secretary Briones told us earlier.
All right, but of course, like you said earlier, also, Mase, August 24, they've been sticking to this deadline for the reopening of classes for the next school year. Tuloy pa ba?
Yes, DepEd remains that the opening of classes will be on August 24.
All right, so let's shift a little bit to other topics. Let's shift over to LGUs. We know a lot of the finer points of executing lockdowns or quarantine regulations fall on local government units. Now, the president has told mayors that they should do more. What exactly did the president mean by that? What specific areas should mayors do more of, or provincial governments?
I think the president is trying to emphasize the significance of implementing the policies of quarantine, like the strict implementation of wearing a face mask and social distancing. And one of the recommendations of Interior Secretary Eduardo Año is to impose a uniform policy of the quarantine. For example, there should be a clear punishment for those who will violate the quarantine policies. How long should they be detained, and how much will be the fine for each violator?
Yeah, that would be a lot less confusing once that happens, right? So I heard DOH Secretary Duque also gave an update on the country's testing capacity. Now, sometimes it's a little bit confusing because they have the total capacity, but the actual daily capacity. So where are we at right now in terms of testing?
Different figures. Earlier, in the pre-recorded message of President Duterte, the Chief Executive asked Health Secretary Francisco Duque if we can conduct a test for all Filipinos in the country, meaning all 100 million of Filipinos here. But Secretary Duque mentioned that it is not possible for now to conduct tests for all Filipinos. What we can do is to target at least to have 10 million Filipinos be tested by 2021. But for now, we already tested about more than 1 million Filipinos. But our capacity is already 70,000 a day. Unfortunately, even if we have already reached 70,000 capacity, we can only test about 25,000 a day, probably because of the lack of health workers.
All right, Maset, one last question, and this is the question everybody always asks. They always ask me, I'm sure they always ask you too. Is there a chance that we're going to go back to a stricter form of community quarantine, meaning go back to MECQ or ECQ? Last week, presidential spokesman Harry Roque said that this could be possible in 2 weeks. That means by next week, they should be making a decision. Did the president or anyone from the cabinet give any indication that this could possibly be happening?
Sean, we're supposed to be in modified ECQ now. The Metro Manila is supposed to be in MECQ now. That was the initial decision of President Duterte. But then Secretary Galvez and Secretary Anyo appealed to the president that maybe it will be advisable if we will just remain to be under GCQ. Anyway, the mayors already promised that they will impose a stricter or a more efficient localized lockdown. That was their promise to the president. That's why they were able to convince the president to agree. And just put Metro Manila or place Metro Manila under GCQ instead of MECQ. But it was very clear during the message or the public address of the president last week that if the mayors or the local government will not be able to sustain the localized lockdown or to improve the number of cases and the critical care capacity and the doubling rate, there is really a big chance that the Metro Manila will be placed under MECQ. But it's still early to tell because we have not yet reached the 15-day period that the president allotted. So we still have to wait until next week.
All right, loud and clear. Thank you very much for all those updates. Maricel Halili joining us from Mandaluyong today. And here are other stories we're keeping our eyes on. The number of workers affected by the pandemic in the Philippines has reached the 3 million mark. The Labor Department says almost 2 million of them were affected by temporary closures of establishments, while over 1.1 million workers have to settle for flexible work arrangements. And the Lotto will resume on August 4. According to the PCSO, tickets will be sold in selected areas depending on the community quarantine category and lockdown status being implemented by LGUs. And PAGASA spotted a low-pressure area or LPA off the coast of Guiuan, eastern Samar. But the State Weather Bureau says that this is unlikely to develop into a tropical cyclone. For more updates, follow News 5, the Philippine Star, and Business World online. Visit our website, onenews.ph, for more in-depth analysis. You can also catch One News on the Signal Play app. Register for a free account at www.signalplay.com and stream One News live anytime, anywhere. I'm Sean Yao. We are One News.